Ever scroll through Instagram and feel that quiet ache? The one that whispers you're somehow behind. You see it everywhere. Marble kitchens glowing with natural light. Women in silk robes sipping lattes beside Dior candles. Captions that promise a life of ease and abundance. Luxury as it's sold to us online doesn't just look beautiful, it looks complete. It tells us that if we just work harder, buy smarter, become more, we can finally earn our way into serenity. But what if this glossy dream, this endless stream of soft life inspiration isn't elevating us but quietly eroding our sense of peace? What if the constant pursuit of looking wealthy is making us more anxious, more indebted, and more disconnected from ourselves than ever before? Luxury content isn't just about beauty, it's about belonging, and that's what makes it so dangerous. Because when aspiration becomes the air we breathe, reality starts to feel like failure. Today we're pulling back the velvet curtain to explore the roots of digital affluence, how centuries of performance, class signaling, and feminine image making have evolved into the modern luxury illusion that's slowly consuming our joy. And hello everyone, my name is Laura and welcome to my channel. Chapter 1. The Glamour Trap. Aspiration versus reality. Luxury has always held a spell over us. A glittering mirage that promises not just beauty, but transcendence. It's the fantasy that somewhere beyond the drudgery of everyday life lies a world of ease, grace, and abundance. But that spell didn't begin with Instagram. It's far older. Born in palaces, perfected in drawing rooms, and reborn on our screens. In the 18th century, French aristocrats like Marie Antoinette turned luxury into a full-scale performance. At Versailles, opulence wasn't just a privilege, it was a duty. Every silk gown, powdered wig, and porcelain teacup served as a visual declaration of status. But the irony was that the most powerful women in the world were performing effortlessness, under unbearable scrutiny. Marie Antoinette's famous simple muslin gowns worn in her private retreat were meant to signal purity and natural grace, yet each one cost more than a servant's annual salary. The Queen of France, dressing like a shepherdess in silk, invented what we now call aspirational authenticity. It looked natural, but it was anything but. The illusion of ease, the fantasy that luxury can appear natural, became the foundation of modern glamour. By the 19th century, as industrialization reshaped society, luxury began to trickle down to the newly wealthy middle classes. The aristocratic performance of refinement was no longer the sole domain of the royals. It became a social currency anyone with means could buy into. The drawing rooms of Paris and London filled with chandeliers, gilded mirrors, and hand-painted china, not because these objects were useful, but because they were signifiers. Philosopher Thorstein Veblen, observing this phenomenon in 1899, coined the term conspicuous consumption, the practice of purchasing not for comfort, but for display. Owning something beautiful was no longer about pleasure. It was about proof. As the 20th century dawned, luxury performance evolved once again, and the stage moved into the home. After World War II, prosperity was repackaged for the masses. In 1950s America, luxury took on a domestic tone. Shiny cars, pastel kitchens, and manufactured lawns became symbols of stability and success. The good life wasn't just about what you owned, it was about how well you performed contentment. Women in particular were cast as the directors of this domestic theater, a spotless home, a polished smile. A string of pearls became the hallmarks of a woman's worth. Post-war ideals sold comfort as control, happiness as homemaking. Then came the 1980s and luxury lost its subtlety. In a world obsessed with Wall Street, status, and excess, wealth became a spectacle. Gold chains, shoulder pads, and glossy power suits transformed the aesthetics of luxury into something unapologetically loud. And the message was simple. Success wasn't something you whispered, it was something you wore. Movies like American Psycho and Working Girl captured this era's ethos. Power was beauty and beauty was for sale. This was the decade of the designer label, when logos themselves became the accessory. But today, in the age of Instagram, luxury has morphed into something quieter and far more insidious. The gold chains have been replaced with beige cashmere, the status handbags with quiet luxury, yet beneath this minimalist aesthetic lies the same old obsession. the desire to prove. Luxury is no longer an occasional indulgence or an elite privilege, it's an expectation, a lifestyle to be performed daily, publicly on our feeds. Scroll through Instagram or TikTok and you'll see echoes of Versailles and Madison Avenue alike. The marble countertops, the dewy skincare routines, the immaculate wardrobes. They're new symbols of modern refinement, except now the set has gone digital. The palace is your apartment, the audience is everyone you follow. Behind every serene, soft life morning routine is a tripod, a ring light, and a sponsorship contract. Behind every shot of effortless elegance is a woman working tirelessly to sustain an image that feels authentic but is meticulously produced. Effortlessness, as history reminds us, is one of the most labor-intensive illusions ever invented. Whether it was a queen pretending to be a peasant, a 1950s housewife pretending to be happy, or a 2020s influencer pretending to be calm, the fantasy remains the same. The appearance of ease, no matter the cost. And that's the glamour trap. Luxury once signified arrival, a destination, but in our digital era, it became a treadmill. The moment you achieve one idea, a new one appears. Someone's richer, sleeker, more natural, more effortless. You can never win because the system isn't designed for satisfaction, it's designed for desire. Because the dream of luxury, from Versailles to social media, was never meant to make you feel fulfilled. It was meant to keep you wanting. Chapter 2, the illusion of attainable opulence. Luxury used to exist behind velvet ropes, a fantasy preserved for the few. For most of history, wealth was meant to be admired from afar, not replicated. It lived in the flicker of candlelight at Versailles, in the shimmer of a silver gown at an aristocratic ball, or in the glossy pages of a post-war fashion magazine. But somewhere along the way, the fantasy escaped. What once shimmered in palaces and film reels now glows from the palms of our hands. Social media has collapsed the distance between aspiration and access, and in doing so, it has blurred the line between having luxury and appearing to have it. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok thrive on what performs best, and nothing performs better than wealth. It's algorithmic alchemy. Opulence draws engagement. Engagement drives visibility, and visibility turns into profit. The digital age has transformed luxury from private indulgence into a public currency. We no longer buy for pleasure, but for performance. A photo of Dior lipstick isn't just a cosmetic choice, it's a declaration of taste, status, and self-worth. The more unattainable something looks, the more it circulates. And the more it circulates, the more it becomes the standard. Because here's the quiet irony. This attainable opulence is often a little more than smoke and mirrors. The lavish vacations, the marble kitchens, the neutral tone wardrobes. So much of it is staged, sponsored, or borrowed. Influencers rent luxury cars for the weekend, book Airbnb mansions for content shoots, and wear lone designer pieces in the name of authenticity. We're living in a digital revival of 18th century portraiture, where painters like Elizabeth V.G. Lebrun immortalize a Marie Antoinette in poses of effortless grandeur. Today's influencers perform the same illusion, except their canvas is the Instagram feed, their paintbrush a Lightroom preset, and their audience millions instead of monarchs. And just like those painted portraits, the modern luxury feed is less about reality and more about narrative. The 18th century elite used their portraits to rewrite their identities, to appear more virtuous, graceful, and benevolent than they really were. Similarly, digital creators create their feeds to suggest moral superiority through aesthetic perfection. The minimalist apartment signals self-discipline. The wellness routines suggest inner peace. The brand partnerships hint at worthiness. Luxury no longer just means wealth, it implies virtue. This connection between opulence and morality has deep roots. In the Victorian era, the rising middle classes sought to emulate the aristocrats not just to appear rich, but to appear respectable. Refinement was moralized. A polished home reflected a polished soul. Women were expected to cultivate domestic beauty as a sign of spiritual purity. Lace curtains, pressed linens, and afternoon teas were not just traditions, but symbols of discipline and virtue. The message was clear: order in the home and order in the heart. Sound familiar? The 20th century clean girl aesthetic, with its slicked back hair, bare-faced glow, and beige minimalism operates on the same logic. It's not just about looking good, it's about looking good for the right reasons. A neutral color palette signals restraint. Tidy apartments suggest inner balance. A matcha latte and journaling routine imply moral and emotional superiority. The visual language has changed. Porcelain teacups and embroidery have become skincare fridges and air-wrapped curls. But the subtext remains the same. Beauty equals virtue and discipline equals worth. We like to call this empowerment, but much like women of the 19th century, our sense of self is still tethered to external validation. Only now the audience isn't the neighbors or the church, but the algorithm. Every click, every view, every save becomes a vote of approval. We perform abundance not just for others, but to prove ourselves that we are doing life right. Yet despite knowing how artificial it all is, our brains don't care. And psychologists call this social comparison bias. Even when we're aware that what we see is staged, our minds process it as reality. Each scroll becomes a psychological negotiation between envy and inadequacy. We tell ourselves we're immune, but our subconscious is quietly keeping score. We start to believe that happiness can be bought, that serenity can be styled, that we're just one purchase away from peace. But the truth is much darker. We're not building lives of luxury, we're building illusions of them, often at the expense of our financial and emotional well-being. Debt, once a private burden, has become a public costume. The Instagram economy rewards aesthetic perfection, even if it's purchased on credit. Buy now, post now, pay later. A designer bag becomes an investment in identity. A vacation becomes content. Even rest is monetized as self-care branding. The result is an economy of optics, where appearances matter more than authenticity, and the illusion of wealth holds more value than stability itself. Luxury content doesn't just sell things, it sells meaning. It tells us that wealth is a mindset, that those who vibrate higher will naturally attract abundance. It reframes class aspiration as spirituality, suggesting that if your life doesn't look like a neutral tone mood board, you simply haven't aligned with success. And in this way, luxury becomes not just an aesthetic, but a quiet system of shame. Because what began as aspiration, a simple longing for beauty, comfort, and elegance, has evolved into a moral hierarchy, one that tells us that our value isn't defined by our kindness, creativity, or depth, but how expensively we appear to live. It's hierarchy that thrives on insecurity, that keeps us striving instead of resting, comparing instead of connecting. We think we're chasing luxury, but in truth, luxury is chasing us, whispering in our ears that we are only as worthy as we are watchable. And that illusion, the illusion of attainable opulence, may be the most profitable lie ever told. Chapter 3. The mental health cost of curated lives. For centuries, women have been told to perfect the art of appearance, to make life look beautiful, even when it isn't. What began as a social expectation has now evolved into a full-time occupation. The digital age has transformed that performance into something measurable, monetized, and nearly inescapable. The modern woman isn't just living, she's producing. She's the director, editor, and star of her own curated reality show. Updating daily for public consumption, luxury content promises peace, but it delivers pressure, a quiet, persistent kind that seeps into the smallest moments. You wake up and already feel behind. You scroll through that girl routines filmed in golden light, watch strangers sip green juice in marble kitchens, and feel a pang of failure before your day has even begun. It's not just to simply exist, you must document your existence. Every meal, every outfit, every slow Sunday morning must be styled, captioned, and shared. Stillness itself must be optimized for engagement. This kind of self-curation isn't new, it's simply more visible. In the Victorian era, women were praised for their ability to maintain the illusion of domestic perfection. A spotless home, polite smile, a well-dressed appearance weren't just aesthetic choices, they were moral obligations. The ideal woman was a living emblem of refinement, soft-spoken, graceful, and always put together. Even emotional labor was aestheticized. A woman's distress had to appear delicate. her exhaustion disguised beneath lace cuffs and composure. A century later, in the 1950s, this performance continued under a new name, the happy homemaker. Post-war advertising glorified women who found joy in sparkling kitchens, who looked radiant while vacuuming in pearls. The message was clear. Perfection wasn't just a standard, it was a responsibility. To be visibly happy was to be a good woman. Today, the same expectation has been digitized and multiplied. The influencer, or the everyday woman performing like one, lives under the tyranny of constant exposure. The rules haven't changed, only the tools. Where the Victorian woman performed for her neighbors, and the 1950s housewife for her community, the modern woman performs for the algorithm, an invisible audience that never sleeps. She must look perfect, but pretend it's natural. Be aspirational, but act relatable. Her home, her body, her routine, all must suggest control, even when she feels chaos inside. Psychologically, the perpetual performance takes a devastating toll. Studies show that social media envy and appearance-related comparison are strongly linked to higher rates of depression and anxiety, and even body dysmorphia, especially among women. What's more alarming is that when we know something is fake, we know the lighting, the filters, the sponsorships, our brains still respond emotionally as if they were real. We internalize what we see as evidence of our own inadequacy. If she can live like that, why can't I? The disconnect between what we know intellectually and what we feel emotionally creates a unique kind of burnout, one built on endless comparison. We document our joy to prove it, but in the process we stop feeling it. Life becomes something to frame, not to live. Even rest has to be aestheticized. The bubble bath, the scented candle, the matcha ritual, all captured and shared. Stillness is no longer sacred, it's staged. And behind this emotional fatigue lies another, quieter trap: economic pressure. The Instagram economy has normalized the idea that appearance equals value. To seem affluent, even when you're not, is to appear successful. And social success can translate to opportunity, visibility, and influence. And the result? Culture of women quietly going into debt to maintain an illusion of abundance. Credit cards stretched for investment pieces. Designer bags purchased on payment plans. Vacations financed by Klarna, all to sustain a digital image that promises prosperity while concealing financial fragility. This isn't simply vanity, it's survival in a system that equates visibility with worth. The influencer's wealth becomes proof of virtue, evidence of discipline, manifestation, and high vibration living. The line between lifestyle and morality blurs. Success becomes synonymous with spiritual alignment. The struggle is reframed as personal failure. You're not overworked and underpaid, you're just not in your abundance era yet. But beneath all the filters and affirmations lies the same old story. Historically, women have been expected to make suffering look beautiful, to smile through exhaustion, to turn scarcity into grace. The Victorian hostess arranging flowers to hide her loneliness, the 1950s mother polishing a kitchen to suppress her rage, the influencer editing her face until it looks like peace. They are all different iterations of the same expectation, to be desirable even in distress. And that's the real cost, not the money spent on skincare or clothes, but the erosion of self-worth. When our value is measured by how aspirational we appear, authenticity becomes impossible. Gratitude can't coexist with envy. Peace can't survive under performance. Yet, social media thrives on that tension, keeping us suspended between admiration and inadequacy, validation and emptiness. Historically, luxury has always promised transcendence, a way to rise above the messiness of being human. But what if the mess was never the problem? What if our constant striving to look serene, composed, and luxurious has only stripped us of what's most vital, the freedom to be real? Because what began in royal courts and domestic parlors has now colonized our screens, our minds, and our self-worth. We're performing luxury instead of living joy, curating serenity instead of feeling it. And perhaps the saddest irony of all of this is that peace we keep scrolling for, that glowing, perfectly filtered calm, can't be bought, borrowed, or branded. It can only be felt. And to feel it, we might have to stop performing altogether. Chapter 4, Beyond the Bling. Deconstructing the toxic trends. Luxury has always been about storytelling. Every era invents its own myth of what it means to live well, and every generation performs it differently. But beneath all the rebranding, from powdered wigs to quiet luxury cashmere, the story rarely changes. Luxury has always been about proximity to power, about creating distance between those who have and those who want. What changes is the costume, the tone, and the illusion of authenticity. In the 18th century, the French perfected this theater of appearance. Aristocrats flaunted their wealth through ritualized display. Gold embroidery, ornate hairstyles, and candlelit banquets meant to remind onlookers of their superiority. Yet, even in this excess, there was always anxiety, a fear of seeming too nouveau, too eager, and too tasteless. True luxury was defined not just by possession, but by restraint. Marie Antoinette's simple gowns at her faux rustic retreat were not rejections of opulence, but refinements of it. They signal that she could afford to pretend simplicity, a luxury in itself. Fast forward 2 centuries, and the same paradox has returned in the performance of quiet luxury. After years of maximalism, the loud logos, influencer hauls, and girl boss flex culture of the 2010s, we've entered a new chapter of minimalism disguised as morality. The color palette has muted, the fabrics have softened, the tone has shifted from look at me to I just have taste. Quiet luxury is the 21st century equivalent of the aristocrat's linen shift. It whispers wealth instead of shouting it, but make no mistake, it still speaks the language of exclusion. When we look at today's old money or self-wealth trends, what we're really seeing is class signaling rebranded as virtue. It's not just about wearing Loro Piana instead of Louis Vuitton. It's about communicating. I know better. The irony is that quiet luxury presents itself as an antidote to consumerism. It's simple, timeless, and intentional. But in reality, it's a more expensive form of restraint. A cashmere sweater from the row may look minimal, but its $2,000 price tag says everything about who gets to participate in this aesthetic purity. And historically, this moralization of simplicity has always followed periods of excess. In the early 20th century, after the Gilded Age's diamonds and debutante balls, came the tailored restraint of Coco Chanel. Black dresses, clean lines, pearls instead of jewels. In the 1990s, after the neon chaos of the 80s, came the Calvin Klein minimalism, white shirts, bare faces, and the quiet sophistication of emptiness. Today, after a decade of the influencer maximalism, unboxing videos, flashy trips, designer hauls, we've returned to the same idea, that wealth is most powerful when it looks invisible. But that invisibility is deceptive. Quiet luxury claims to reject the performative excess of influencer culture, yet it thrives on the same mechanisms, the same curated feeds, the same aspirational fantasies, the same obsession with image. It doesn't dismantle the system of status, it just shifts the aesthetic. Instead of chasing logos, we chase lifestyle. Instead of flaunting brands, we flaunt taste. What was once a visual spectacle has become a subtle code, one that still excludes, still pressures, and still commodifies authenticity. And within the cycle, something deeply human gets lost. We start to mistake aesthetic discipline for emotional depth, and minimalism for meaning. Social media teaches us that self-control, in spending, eating, expressing is elegant, that neutrality equals wisdom, but history tells a different story. That simplicity, like extravagance, has always been a class performance. The ability to appear effortless has always depended on hidden labor. The maids who clean the linen gowns, the assistants who manage influencer schedules, the invisible workers who sustain the illusion of ease. Even sustainability, often evoked by the quiet luxury movement, is frequently aestheticized rather than practiced. We fetishize linen dresses, handcrafted ceramics, and minimalist spaces. But behind many of these trends lie the same consumer impulses they claim to transcend. The fantasy of buying less but better only truly works for those who can afford to buy better. For everyone else, it becomes another impossible ideal. Another standard of moral worth we can't quite reach. And then there's the question of influence itself. Luxury content creators often claim to inspire their audiences, framing their lifestyles as aspirational yet achievable. But what responsibility comes with that influence? When a woman with generational wealth calls her daily walks through Paris manifestation, or when an influencer markets self-care through $400 candles, we begin to see how the ethics of influence become tangled in privilege. The problem isn't that these lifestyles exist. It's that they are marketed as accessible through mindset, not money. This illusion of attainability, rooted in centuries of class performance, is what makes modern luxury culture so psychologically potent. The aristocrat's palace and the influencer's apartment both whisper the same seductive lie. You could have this too. What they've never said is that the system depends on most of us never actually getting there. The dream must remain just out of reach, or the fantasy collapses. So when we look beyond the bling, what we really find is an authenticity. It's a new iteration of the same performance. Luxury, even in its quietest form, still thrives on illusion. It feeds on aspiration, comparison, and the emotional labor of those trying to keep up. And like every trend before it, it will eventually exhaust us, because the problem was never the sparkle, it was the story. The myth that happiness can be curated, that beauty equals virtue, that simplicity equals soul. The truth is, luxury doesn't lose its toxicity when it softens. It just becomes harder to see. The challenge then isn't to reject luxury outright. It's to stop confusing appearance with peace. True elegance, both historically and personally, has never come from what we own, but from how deeply we live. And perhaps the most radical form of rebellion in a world obsessed with quiet wealth is not minimalism or maximalism, but authenticity. The courage to live without performance, the audacity to find beauty in what is real, unfiltered and imperfect. Because when the bling fades and the filters lift, what's left isn't the image of a good life. It's a chance to finally feel one. Chapter 5, Reclaiming Your Reality and Finding True Well-Being. After all the glitter fades, after the reels stop looping, the filters lose their glow, and the algorithm forgets your name, what's left? For many of us, it's a kind of emptiness that feels unfamiliar, almost shameful. We spend so long chasing a digital version of the good life that we've forgotten what an uncurated one feels like. But underneath the exhaustion, there's also something stirring. A quiet hunger for realness, a yearning not for more, but for enough. Throughout history, periods of aesthetic excess have always been followed by moments of return. Back to simplicity, to sincerity, to self. In the wake of the Gilded Age came the arts and craft movement, a rebellion against industrial luxury that celebrated craftsmanship and imperfection. After the artifice of the 1950s domesticity came the counterculture of the 60s, with its handmade clothes and communal living, an anti-consumer ethos. Every time the world has been smothered with artifice, there's been a cultural exhale, a collective desire to slow down and touch something real. We're living through one of those moments again. The rise of burnout culture, the quiet luxury backlash, the growing fascination with slow living, mindfulness, and de-influencing all point to the same truth. We're tired of performing perfection. We're craving depth, not display. Presence, not polish. But reclaiming that authenticity in a world that monetizes attention isn't easy. It requires unlearning. Reclaiming your reality begins with small acts of defiance, gentle, private ones. It's the decision to let a meal go unphotographed, to enjoy your morning without broadcasting it, and to sit in a room that isn't aesthetically arranged. These small rejections of performity are radical because they remind you that your life has meaning, even when it's unseen. In a culture that rewards constant display, privacy becomes a kind of luxury. True, well-being isn't found in abundance, but in alignment. It's learning to ask what actually nourishes me, not what will look nourishing to others. Maybe it's journaling without aesthetic intention, or wearing clothes that make you feel comfortable rather than curated. Maybe it's letting your home be messy because you're living in it, not staging it. These are all quiet revolutions, small, unshareable moments that restore the self the algorithm can't touch. And historically, women have always found power in private rituals. In Victorian parlors, they wrote letters, embroidered initials, or arranged flowers, small acts that grounded them in an unhurried rhythm of care. In the 1970s, women's unconsciousness raising groups redefined self-care as a political act, a way of reclaiming time, attention, and dignity in a world that devalued both. Today, we can learn from those same practices to take care of ourselves not as content creators but as humans. This reclamation also requires reframing what we mean by luxury. Real luxury has never been about possession. It's about permission. The permission to rest, to take up space, to exist without justification. In a world that asks us to monetize every moment, stillness becomes subversive. The real luxury is not the handbag, but the headspace. Not the influence vacation, but the weekend where you disappear without explanation. And perhaps most importantly, reclaiming reality means rediscovering community. The digital luxury illusion thrives on isolation. It tells us that success is individual, that happiness is solitary, that belonging must be earned through status. But historically, luxury was never meant to be experienced alone. The salons of Paris, the women's circles of the 19th century, the dinner parties and sewing circles. These were communal acts of creation, not competition. Real abundance grows in connection, not comparison. When we return these roots to the slow, the handmade, the imperfect, something in us softens. We begin to realize that the things that make life beautiful aren't aspirational. They're accessible. They're in the morning light through the curtains. The laughter with the friend, the quiet of being unobserved. The truth that all the algorithms in the world can't sell us is that happiness doesn't need to be aesthetic, it just needs to be felt. So maybe the new dream isn't digital affluence at all. Maybe it's emotional wealth, a life rich with peace, connection, and time. A life that isn't curated for strangers, but cultivated for yourself. Because the ultimate rebellion against the toxicity of luxury culture isn't to reject beauty, but to redefine it, to see beauty not as something bought, but as something lived. And in a world that tells you to perform constantly, the bravest, most luxurious thing you can do is to simply be. So thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments below. I mean, I've done this before where I'm like, trying to find footage and stuff for my videos, and then I end up feeling bad about myself, where I'm like, oh my god, why isn't my kitchen this nice? Why isn't my house this nice? And then I'm like, I ended up even getting tempted to buy certain beauty products because I think they're gonna make me happy. And I have done that. I've bought in certain like hair care things and shampoos that I see in TikTok, and then there's a slight thrill when the package comes in the mail, but then I'm like, I don't really feel any happier. So anyways, it's interesting how it's all become this way. So let me know in the comments below your thoughts on this. All right, thanks for watching.